Okay, Jay, the class will begin now, and I'll turn it over to you, and I'll actually spotlight you. Okay, we're in business.
Okay. Thanks. I want to see the gallery so I can see people. I'll give a quick review of what we covered last week as sort of a refresher, and then pick it up from there. And what we're going to talk about this tonight is the symbolism and how that fits into Kabbalah, and then move into Shabbat. And I'm hoping you'll start to get a sense of how the Kabbalists approach both the reading of Torah on Shabbat, and then have translated that into practices and rituals. And I think you'll see that you never really understood the Shabbat before, just as with Pesach last week. So last week I gave an overview of the nature of Kabbalah, what Kabbalah is, what it isn't. Kabbalah is basically a theology of Judaism where God is flowing into us rather than outside and separated. And those flows into us are called Sefirot, from the root Samach Pei Resh, which is the same root for Sefer, book, or Mispar, number, or the Saper, telling, and the same very similar word to the word spheres of the Greeks, and the Platonic spheres, a really close connection in terms of emanation of God into the world. So you could say that the Kabbalists borrowed that concept from the Greeks, but actually the concept of receiving goes back into biblical times, and it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it could be the other way around, that the Greek philosophers borrowed this from the Jews. So the Sefirot, I'm going to go on a share screen now so I can pull up the handouts. I hope everybody has the two key handouts, because you'll need them this week: the Tree of Life of the Sefirot and the catalog or compendium of symbolism. It says it's disabled participant sharing, so you have to make me a co-host in order for me to share. Okay, Jerry? I think you go to participants and you make me a co-host that way. And I'll be right back.
This is Muzak.
Okay. Can I share now? Yes. Good, excellent. Can you guys see this? The
Yes.
tree of life came up? Okay. Yeah, this is the tree of life. And notice there's 3 columns. A right column of wisdom, kindness, and principles, and a left column of understanding or intelligence, power and coalescence, and motivation, particularly emotional motivation. And the central column, which we'll particularly focus on this week, is the unknowable source called Keter, the crown of emanation. Tiferet is literally means beauty, but it really more closely, beauty is really part of perfect balance, equilibrium, harmony, and oneness in the world. And all of that together is holiness. Holiness is harmony, balance, equilibrium. And tonight we're going to learn the importance of holiness flowing into our ability to feel God's presence, and therefore to become holy for Shabbat. And it's the whole essence of Shabbat to Kabbalists, is that marriage of Tiferet and Malchut, Yud He Vav He, and the Shekhinah. And in between, what brings them together is Yesod, meaning foundation, but really the life force itself, our drives, our instincts, what keeps us alive, the ability to be healed. All this is also a flow from God, an emanation that we receive, and represents the part of the body that's the genitals. And that unites the groom, Tiferet, with its bride, the Kala Malchut. Every holiday, but particularly every Shabbat. Jerry, do you want to turn off the ringing for whenever somebody enters?
I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then after we elaborated on this, everybody understood it well, we went into a discussion of this thing's getting bigger and bigger, and I always have trouble getting it smaller again. There we go. Too small. I don't like that feature. Okay, here it is.
Good thing, Jay.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we went into a discussion of Passover, and Passover is a holiday that is beautifully elaborated and on by the Kabbalists and interpreted. It's a holiday of eliminating chametz, which is evil inclination, and therefore we can celebrate the left side, because the left side, intelligence, bina, power, Gevorah, and hod, our emotional motivation, has with it what's called the evil inclination. There's always a potentiality for sin. That becomes a core concept, of course, in Yom Kippur, as we identify our sins and repent. Repenting is coming back to balance. But the Hagata, as we learned last week, is really all about the left side potencies and celebrating those, because we have a role in the world to be partners with God in ongoing creation. That's a mission of human beings generally, and the Jews specifically, and Kabbalists, from a Kabbalistic understanding. And we need, even though there's the potential for evil attached, we need our intelligence as well as our wisdom. We need our power as well as our urge and to be kind and good, chesed. We need to be motivated as well as to have a mission. And that's what the Haggadah is really about. So The other thing I want to bring up now, if I can, and I think I have to somehow go back to not this. I have to get out of this one for a moment. Can you see this? Does this come up? Figure 2, it says. Can you see the symbols? No one sees the symbols. So let me go out and go back in to the share screen again. And now you should be able to see it, right?
Yes, we see it now.
Yes.
Yeah, it even said participants can now see your application. Okay. A point I mentioned last week is very important this week in understanding the symbols, that the sphirot are both a cluster of meanings. Each of those sphirot have many meanings, and all complementary to each other, such as Tiferet, which is not only holiness, but it means unity, oneness, peace at times, completeness, and harmony, and I'm going down to Tiferet, and balance. All of those are meanings that are in the first part here, but there are also 30 or 40 different symbols. It's also a cluster of Tiferet. So Tiferet has its symbols or code language or aliases and its meanings. So that's an important distinction to make, and that helps a lot of people to understand the Zohar and Kabbalistic writings generally, but also the Kabbalist approach to understanding Jewish prayer, to writing their own prayers, as we'll see this week with Lecha Dodi, written in code. Doesn't make any sense. If you've seen the translations of Lecha Dodi in the Siddur, doesn't make any sense. So we're going to go through that, and I'll read you a Kabbalistic translation of it that I wrote, and you'll get the sense of the importance of that prayer, Lecha Dodi, in the Kabbalah Shabbat, from the word Kabbalah, the receiving of Shabbat, the receiving of the bride, which is the unification of Tiferet and Malchut, and how that is effected, brought about by the singing of that song and by the 7 psalms preceding Lecha Dodi, each one representing a different sphira, a service put together by Isaac Luria, totally Kabbalistic. Isaac Luria, famous head of a whole new school of Kabbalah in Sfat in the 16th century that led into Hasidism. It's the most influential school on Hasidism, and to some extent contemporary Kabbalah, in Jewish renewal Kabbalah. So, see, each of these, so Tiferet, there's a name of God associated with each of these sphirot. There's colors associated. There's forefathers associated. And for instance, Tiferet is the holy name of God, Yud He Vav He. So Yud He Vav He means Tiferet. Whenever you see Yud He Vav He in Torah or in a prayer, Baruch Atah Adonai, that's blessed are you, the aspect of you that's Tiferet. So it adds a whole new dimension to Jewish prayer, a whole new understanding, to understand the symbolism, and that each name of God connotes a different sphira. So a second category, very important. I'm going to go down. I have this in two for easier learning. By Svirah, I had all the symbols related to them. And here it is by category. So Eheyeh, you will be, is Keter. Hamakom is Tiferet. Yah, like hallelujah, is Chokhmah, wisdom. Adonai Elohim or Adonai Eloheinu is Bina, when you have Adonai and Eloheinu together, Yud Hey Vav Hey. And Elohim Chayim is also Bina, that's intelligence, understanding. El, an important one. The short name for God is Chesed, but Elohim is Gevorah, or Din. And the Yud Hey Vav Hey again is Tiferet, but Adonai Tzavaot, and that comes up today, is Netzach, our principles, our ability to form values and define our mission, our purpose. But Elohim Tzavaot is Hod, the motivation that goes with it. Shaddai and El Chai both are the God names for Yesod. Shaddai means my breast, the nurturing aspect of God. El Chai is the God of life, which is what Yesod is. The word Adonai, Lord, is Malchut, as is Shekhinah. And the whole concept of Malchut is Shekhinah, the closeness of God, the ability to feel God's presence. Now remember, all of these Sfirot are not different gods. They're all part of the same God, aspects, attributes of one unknowable source that flows into us through these channels of 10 Sfirot. But a second important category of symbols is the parts of our body, particularly if you're a meditator and you want to feel the flow coming in. The flow of God coming into different parts of your body is associated with different Sfirot. So the crown of the head is Keter, the right brain and the left brain are Chokhmah and Bina. The heart is also Bina. They thought of the heart as the brain in antiquity. And the center of the body is Tiferet, the torso. Right arm is Chesed, and left arm is Gevorah. And it was a strong left arm that is always mentioned in the Hagata. So they don't always mention left, but Kabbalists read that as a strong arm of God, the power of God that freed us and that coalesced us into a people. That was Gevorah. The right leg, Netzach, and the left leg is Hod. And the word Hod is short to Kabbalists for Hoda'ah, according to Gikati in the 13th century, who did the first compendium that we have of these symbols. So when you say in the morning, Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam, I'm grateful to you, God, for my life. You can, if you're a Kabbalist, you feel the flow coming into that left leg. It makes all the difference. And the genitals are Yesod. Testicles and Netzach and Hod are kidneys. The feet that we stand on, our pedestal is Malchut, connection to the ground. And the liver is also Hod. So that's the parts of the body. So colors, important. Again, red and red wine is Gevorah, but white is Chesed. So we wear white when we're married, a kittel, and on Yom Kippur we wear white to draw God's compassion, God's Chesed, rather than red, which draws God's power and judgment and control Yellow is Tiferet, so it represents the sun, Tiferet, but green is the Sphira of Bina. So the Karpars, the green, when we eat that on the Seder plate, we're taking a taste and ingesting Bina. So those are the important ones. Now the days of the week are important, as are the forefathers. Let me do the forefathers first. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are Chesed, Gevorah, and Tiferet, which is goodness, power, and balance between them, and so forth through the others. King Solomon is Chokhmah, and that's referenced a lot in the Zohar. So when you read the Zohar, it's interpreting a story of Abraham, and Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Well, that's not a person, Abraham. You have to read that as Chesed has been born into the world, has been created by God. And Chesed is trying to sacrifice its left arm part of God, that Isaac, which has evil inclination connected with it, which is Gevorah, not Isaac, the individual, the child, but the child of power in the world being created. And Tiferet, the holiness of God, the angel of, or the messenger of Tiferet says, Abraham, Chesed, what are you doing? You can't sacrifice your Gevorah, that you can't be a co-creator without power. Just because you're afraid, you're so good that you're afraid of the evil inclination attached to Gevorah on the left side generally. We have to have Gevorah, and we have to have coalescence, even though we can create totalitarian regimes and horrible kings. And there's 1,000 years of bad kings, a few good ones in there in Jewish history, with excessive abuse of power. And we see that now in Bamidbar with Moses. Unfortunately, it's a theme of abuse of power, in a sense. So that's an example of how the Kabbalists would approach Torah and interpret in terms of the Sfirot under the surface. So I read last week, woe to the person, says Rabbi Shimon, who looks at just the stories, the garments of Torah, and doesn't look underneath by using this symbolism, these clusters of symbols. And similar with the mothers. So when we say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob in the Amidah, a Kabbalist immediately might contemplate on and feel the flow of Chesed, of Gevorah, and of Tiferet, respectively. As we mentioned, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then in Farbrengen and other congregations, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, Rachel, Rachel represent Hod, Netzach, Bina, and Malchut. Okay, so that brings us to Shabbat and the 7 days of the week. And I think we should go back where it belongs. I don't know how it got over there. Tiferet tends to wander, it's got a mind of its own. So the days of the week are important because the seventh day, these are the 7 days of creation. So they reflect the 7 days of the week today. The first day of creation is Chesed, and the second Gevorah, Tiferet. All of the lower 7 Sfirot are a unit in and of themselves in Kabbalah. And they, each one representing one of the, each day of the week, therefore, and each number, 1 to 7, represents these respective Sfirot. kindness, power, balance, principles, emotions, life, and the ability to experience God and feel the presence. That's Shabbat. Shabbat is the ability to feel the presence. So keep that thought in mind. How do we get to that point where we feel the presence of the Shekhinah, and we feel holiness, and we become holy? Okay. So I'm going to stop share for a moment. Okay. So this brings us to the interesting part of this. That's all sort of background. And don't worry if that's a little deep. We went through that fairly quickly. And you can look over, if you have the handout, all of the different categories and start to learn that. But it becomes very important in Kabbalah in understanding. That's what really brings the spirituality into Kabbalah, is the names of God associated with the forefathers, and all of those categories, all of those symbols as they occur in various prayers, whether it's God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Adonai Tzvaot, the Netzach aspect of God, the God of powers, it literally means. But on Shabbat, it's particularly important because Shabbat is a holiday of unifying Tiferet and Malchut. Tiferet is holiness, as well as balance and harmony. It's all the same thing to a Kabbalist. It's creating harmony, holiness, and oneness in us by flowing into Malchut, its bride, and having a metaphor of a sexual union between the male and female. There's a lot of that image in the Zohar and in Kabbalistic writing, but we're creating that union within ourselves and becoming holy. Now, how do they get to that point? Well, the Kabbalists interpret the four mentions, actually 5 verses that mention Shabbat. You shall observe Shabbat and make it holy, as by an alternate translation of the Kadesh Oto, to make it holy, means to marry it. So the Kabbalists, the commandment is to marry Yud He Vav He, bring about the merger of Yud He Vav He with its Shekhinah, its bride, and then we become holy. Remember the Sabbath day to make it holy in Exodus 20, verse 8, Exodus 20, verse 11. Therefore, Yud and betroth it means, therefore Yud He Vav He blessed the Sabbath day and married it, betrothed it, v'yikadshehu. And then Exodus 31:17, because in 6 days God made the heaven and the earth. On the 7th day he Shabbated, he made Shabbat, often translated ceased or rested. No, he made Shabbat, and he made the soul, nefesh, v'yinafash. Not that he was refreshed, but it literally means he made nefesh, the soul, an added soul. And that added soul is what gives us holiness on Shabbat. We have Yeshama Yetera, an added soul on Shabbat in Kabbalah, to Kabbalists. And then he said, and then that verse continues, or the next verse, which we don't usually read as part of the Kiddush. But it's the crucial part for a Kabbalist. it continues, and he made nefesh, and he gave it to Moses. Moses is Netzach, remember, is principles, value, mission, the lawgiver. And he gave it to our law-giving ability and our value-making ability as its kekaluto, as its bride. Often translated as its completion, which is no meaning, as its completion. But as its bride has tremendous amount of meaning. To speak with him. In other words, to speak, to enable receiving of revelation to the Kabbalists. So I want to pull up the first mention, Bereshit chapter 2, and sort of look at that together, because I think it's instructive in terms of understanding how Kabbalists would read something very fundamental in understanding Shabbat and understanding Torah and the story of creation. And here is the share screen again, and I will. Did I bring this up?
You don't see it yet?
No, I don't have it yet, but I have it right here. Okay, so I'm going to have to do it this way, and then bring this up. There it is. Okay, you see this?
Yes.
Okay.
It's small to read. We see it though.
Can you see it? I can make it bigger. Okay. And
It's good.
I corrected the translation, which is so bad from a Kabbalistic point of view. And you see how misleading these translations can be in English. The Lord, the heaven and the earth were not finished, but V'yachulu is kala. It's short to a Kabbalist. They see the word kala in their bride, and he made a bride. The heavens and the earth were brided in all their array, in all their v'kol tzava'ah, and all their netzach and hod, not their array. That's a very specific term. Tzava'ah, tzava'ot, netzach and hod together, principles along with emotion. On the seventh day, God brided, not finished, but brided the work that he'd been doing, and he not ceased, but he made Sabbath on the seventh day from out of or from all of the work that he had done. There's a whole different sense to this. And God blessed the seventh day and married it, not declared it holy, but married it. Vayikadesh for on it God Shabbated, made Shabbos from all the work of creation that he had done. You see how the Kabbalists read that? Totally different meaning to this. So I'm back. So I'm going to talk next about some of the rituals of Shabbat and how they fit into this sense of this making holy. And how do we turn this theology and all of this abstract business with symbolism into experience? Because the name of the course is Experiencing Kabbalah. And unlike Pesach last week, where you have to wait until next April in order to experience it, right? Shabbat you can experience tomorrow. So give some thought about how some of this could be applied to make your Shabbat more meaningful. First of all, Lecha Dodi, we welcome the bride. Lecha Dodi likrat kala p'nei Shabbat nikabbalah. And I'm going to read what that means. This was written by Alkabetz in the 16th century in Svad. He's one of the disciples of Isaac Luria, a great poet. And the Kabbalists would go out in the evening of Friday night, in the afternoon, and look out to the setting sun. And the setting sun would set, as when I was last in Svat, right between the breasts of Mount Meron. Mount Meron is in the form of a reclining woman, Shekhinah. And they would sing this to the bride, to the Shekhinah, as the sun was setting. It also is the place where Shimon Bar Yochai, its tomb is. And so it's very holy, especially to Haredi and to Hasidim. And on Lag BaOmer, there's a huge gathering there every year because it's such a holy place to Kabbalists. Lecha Dodi, go forth, my beloved, likrat kala, to call your bride. Beloved, well, that's code for Yud He Vav He. Likrat, to call your Shekhinah. So if you think that for us, go forth the aspect of holiness to call your Shekhinah within us, and in order to unite. P'nei Shabbat, the face, the beginning, the opening of Shabbat, nikabbalah, we must receive. Lecha Dodi, go forth, Tiferet, to call your Shekhinah, because the openings, the beginning of Shabbat, we must receive. We must receive our Kala, P'nei Shabbat, nikabbalah. And the verses, and he Shabbated, whoops, wrong section. The countenance of Shabbat, another way to translate that, we shall receive the face of Shabbat. And God, guard and remember in one word, the two commandments on Shabbat, Shemor, observe or guard, and observe and remember this chor, Sechoret Yom HaShabbat. Remember, in one word, the uniting God made us hear. Made us hear. Hearing is receiving, like Shema Yisrael. Hear, Israel, Lord our God, the Lord is one. Yud He Vav He is one, and his name is one. For name, for Tiferet, and for praise. Yud He Vav He, Tiferet is one, and his name is one. His Malchut are one, united, for name and Tiferet, and for praise. Then we go back to Lecha Dodi likrat kala. To call Shabbat and go forth, we shall go to her, open our gates to her, for she is the source of blessing, the flow of Sfirot. From before head, from Ein Sof, it poured forth, from Keter, the end of the act of creation, in thought, a beginning. Temple of a king, city of sovereignty. Get up, leave from the midst of upheaval. For too long have you sat in the valley of crying, and he will show pity upon you. Yud He Vav He will bring chesed into the Shekhinah, pity into the Shekhinah. And so on until the last verse, when everyone rises and turns to the back of the congregation, not to the door, okay? And it drives me crazy when rabbis say, now everyone arise and you face the door to welcome the bride to come in. No, it has nothing to do with the door. It's from the west. And the ark is in the front of the congregation, which is the east, which is very important to know Kabbalistically, because certain prayers are done not facing the ark, but facing the east, like the Amida, for instance, and the Aleinu are always done facing the east. And the east is Tiferet. So you feel the flow coming in of balance, holiness, oneness. But here we feel Malchut, the Shekhinah, the presence of God coming in from the west. West is the direction of the Shekhinah, and east is the direction of Tiferet. So we're bowing not to a God coming in, but we're bowing in Kabbalah to feel the flow, let the flow come in, whether it's in the Aleinu and we bow, or we bow to the Kala. It's not worshiping the Kala, the bride, because the bride is Shekhinah. It is receiving her. You see the difference? Suddenly the experience is there to something that is just wrote, a very nice song, great music, and then you rush on into the service itself. This is really a meditative and experiential opportunity to feel that flow coming in. So we face the west and receive the Kala, the Kabbalah, Pnei Shabbat, the countenance of Shabbat, of Shekhinah. We must receive, because we must become holy, and we must receive this extra soul through this process. Okay, we could do a whole class on that poem. It's so beautiful if you understand each verse is so full of allusions and symbolism to the Sfirot. Then we light candles, right? Candles, symbol of light, the flow coming into us 3 times. You go like this, right? Why? Because that's what our grandmothers did and their grandmothers, but nobody knows the reason. Well, the reason in Kabbalah is you're rising up higher and higher through the 4 levels. Each circling is going up 1 level further until you're ready to cover your eyes and say the Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat. It's beautiful little ritual, little meditative experience. And of course, the light is the Shefa coming into us. The 2 candlesticks represent the Netzach and the Hod. The Tzava'ot, also called the Tzava'ot, the forces. Netzach, again, is principles and our ability to formulate our own principles. That's a flow of God coming in to us. When the right candlestick and the left candlestick is the flow of Hod, that it's the companion to principle making, law giving, which is the motivation to carry out, to observe it, to stick to it. So those are the 2 candlesticks, all have very Kabbalistic significance. So you see how Kabbalah, which was mainstream Judaism, and now the meaning became the meaning of almost everything we do, and it's become lost. Okay, so that's lighting of candles. I just happen to have here behind me a Kiddush cup, the kind that Kabbalists like, because you go right in the middle of the hand like this. You fill it full of wine, okay? And you hold it in the palm. The palm of your hand is Tiferet. The fingers come around the cup and are grasping and holding it in place. You fill it to the brim And when I spent time with Chabad in Petah Tikva, they would really, the father would fill it to the brim, so at least 1 or 2 drops would fall over, be so full. Why? Because you're balancing. Tiferet is balance, and you are balancing this cup of Gevorah. The wine is Gevorah, is strength. And your fingers are the 5 sfirot. If you take a look at your diagram, these 5 sfirot, Chesed, Gevorah, Tiferet, Netzach, and Hod. Depending if you're holding it in the right hand or the left hand, maybe you need a little more power in your Chesed. So you put the thumb on this side versus your little finger being the Chesed. And of course, your Sod is in the middle, always. So each of those fingers has a lot of very specific significance. Then the meaning of the Kiddush itself, which opens every holiday, not just Shabbat, is effecting, again, this union of Tiferet and Malchut, but it's also in receiving all of these Sfirot that are holding this in the balance of Tiferet in the palm of our hand. It's opening the gates, because power, which is wine, which is red, which is why we use red wine, not white wine, like at some temples, not to mention the names, because the congregants are afraid of the new carpeting and staining it, but it's a good reason, but not a spiritual reason. The spiritual essence is to have red wine, and the same thing on Passover, because we're celebrating the left side, and red is the center of the left side, which is Gevorah. Remember, in the symbols, are the same thing as the entity itself, as the Sphira. So red is not the symbol of Gevorah, like the flag being the symbol of the United States. Red is Gevorah. The wine is Gevorah to us. So it opens the gates, opens the flow, so that just like in waving the lulav and the etrog, you say the blessing with the pitom down, and then you turn it so it's up. That's opening the sprocket. So then you're ready to draw in the potencies of God in 6 directions, and those 6 directions are on your sheets under directions. Same thing. So the Kiddush has beautiful levels of meaning that really bring this ritual to alive spiritually, and that's part of the spirituality that has been lost in Judaism, that was so deep for centuries in doing the Kiddush. Then we bless the candle, the children, right? And Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. We place our hands. Some parents do it with the Shaddai of the priests, the Shin, which is the name of God, Shaddai of Yesod, which is health and wellness and healing. And may you be, you say to the boys, may you be like Ephraim and Menashe, which, because they're 2, they always represent Netzach and Hod. May you have principles, and may you have positive emotion, motivation, free of Yetzer Hara, evil inclination. You can build all sorts of your own prayers into those themes, and teach something about receiving. You're not just receiving it from me, I'm channeling it as your Father down into you, from God into me. Do you feel it coming in? There's a lot of teaching opportunities in these rituals to teach children to be spiritual at a level that they can. So this is really what I call experiencing Kabbalah. When you understand this theological basis, and then the mystical part comes when you apply it. It grows out of, it's enabled by Kabbalah. And one of the most interesting, the final rituals is the Havdalah, right? We have a braided candle, 3 candles braided together, representing the 3 upper levels of the Sfirot, the 3, remember, and there's 4 levels, and the braided candle can represent actually the pillars, the right, the left, and the center, all woven together. And I like that interpretation because all of the Sfirot has got this bright light that's coming into us at the last moments of Shabbat. And we say the blessing over the candles, the light, Moreh Ha'esh, and we bend our fingers, right? And Rabbi Tolosin, I think his name is, I have his books, and in my course I made that required reading, and I always, I think that was, I always felt badly for that. It was a very good general history of general overview of Jewish rituals, but totally un-Kabbalistic. And he said, well, that's so you can check to see if your fingernails are clean for the coming week. Now, who'd want to teach that to kids? And then as they grow up, they teach that to their kids. No, you look at the shadows of your fingers under this holy light, because it's a reminder of the evil inclination, of the shadow side of life, of the shadow side of our lives. And as we're about to enter a new week of co-creating with God, let us do this in harmony and in oneness and ethically, and avoid evil inclination. So it's an important part of the ritual. And the same thing with the smelling of the spices. Smelling, like hearing, is drawing in. So you're drawing in the chesed and all of the sfirot. You can focus on drawing them all in. But particularly the right side, the chokhmah, wisdom, and the chesed, and unselfishness, and the netzach, the principles that I'm going to need in the coming week. And you have the wine representing the left side of the power side, and the understanding and intelligence I'm going to need, and the motivation I'm going to need. And then you extinguish the light, which is extinguishing your extra soul of holiness, because you can't be holy all the time. Unless you're one of the 32 righteous people in the world that live at the embodiment of Yesod, of perfect balance and harmony. So you put it out, that ends the holy and begins the profane part of the week, the daily week. So that's Havdalah, to end Shabbat. So with that, let me turn it open to any questions you might have. And then, of course, I see in my notes a mention of Eliyahu HaNavi. Eliyahu HaNavi ushers in the Messianic age. So it sort of ends with a song of yearning to create for the Messianic age of perfection and balance, perfect harmony, perfect tiferet, and total combination of where we can be holy all the time, putting out the candle is really a reminder that we can't be holy all the time because there's not yet the Messianic age. The Messiah hasn't come, but someday humankind will be so perfect that that it will be holy all of the time, Shabbat all the time.
Jay, there are some interesting questions and comments in the chat.
Okay, let me take a look at those. And I'll go back. Wow, they got pages and pages of them.
Some very good stuff there.
Let me see. I can't see. Okay. Oh, righteousness and peace are missing from the Google Drive's Yesod. I'll send you a new one, an updated one. Then those are important. Peace or shalom is associated in the Zohar at different places with both Yesod and with Tiferet. So it's both, and righteousness is always Tiferet, but some passages make a lot of sense if shalom and peace is talking about Yesod. And in other places, like what we studied just last week, the Zohar basically defines shalom, peace, as Tiferet. So it's very confusing on that, and that's one of the things that makes studying Zohar so much fun. So, okay. How does the Hagata differ from other Jewish texts as far as the tension between the right and the left side, right and left side? Well, the difference is that the Hagata is celebrating the left side because we've eliminated evil inclination. So we can celebrate our intelligence, our power, and our motivation in the only time of the year that we can do that. Other Jewish texts, it depends on the text. I mean, the Zohar is written in the form of a midrash, but it's so different because it's written totally in symbolism. And that symbolism that I gave you the key to understanding and unlocking. And if you continue with us on Monday nights, as Richard did and 3 or 4 other people from last week, then that will be very important, because then part of the fun of studying Zohar, as I just mentioned, is the decoding of it and then wrestling with it and figuring out how this relates to the parsha that it's commenting on, which is surreptitiously subversive, is the language I came up with this year. SS, I call it. It's surreptitious because it's all in the code language that I just explained tonight. And it's subversive because it's indirectly undermining, in many respects, the traditional interpretations of Torah in the Midrash and by Judaism through the centuries. Certainly at their time of the writing of the Zohar in the late 13th century. Okay. Let's see. Is there a multiplicity of meanings of words in the Sefirot, similar to the multiplicity of meanings of many Hebrew words, such as shalom? Right. Is this more metaphorical in its meanings, or more linguistic and epistemological? Is what the words really mean, i.e. The Zohar loves linguistic plays, and oftentimes they'll take a word, like I did tonight with kala and kol, and they see the connection between the two, and suddenly the whole meaning of that section comes alive. And that's certainly true about talking about bride, not completion or all, but the kala is kol. That's a good example of how the Kabbalists really take a practice that's common in Talmudic discussions. So, right, Richard is our Talmudic scholar here, and but they really take that and elaborate on it and come up in some cases with very different interpretations, subtle criticisms of what's happening, particularly in a book like Bamidbar, which is on the surface very controversial. Like last week, the swallowing up of Korach and all his family and the little ones, and is that how you put down rebellions? There's a lot of questions, and it beautifully and poetically, subtly raises a lot of those questions. But with respect to how the Kabbalists are reading this is about the development and the pitfalls in the Sphira Netzach, which is true in all of us. Our law giving is ripe for Yetzer Hara, for anger, to undermine our principle making and our sense of mission and our dealing and the rules we have for dealing with the people we have power over, our employees, our children, our friends, our community. So yeah, the multiplicity of meanings and of the words adds levels and levels of interpretation. Remember that Torah is a transmitter of revelation. So what the Kabbalah provides is an opportunity for each of us to receive our Torah. Torah is given to each of us. And what's beautiful about the Torah discussion for me at Farbrengen in all the years I've been going there is that it's such an open discussion with so many different perspectives. All of us sharing what we see in it, what each parsha, each week means to us in that year at that time. Well, that's exactly what the Kabbalists were doing. So the more meanings and categories and levels of meaning, in the cluster of meanings for any particular sphira gives us a lot, and the cluster of symbols around which gives us a lot of avenues to interpret. There are basically 10 characters of the Zohar, and they're all building on each other. And they all have slightly different perspectives. And that's how Talmud should be studied in small groups, never alone, but in small groups where you can build on each other's inspiration and their receiving. And so striving for your personal receiving. These categories remind me of the different aspects of the weeks of counting the Omer. And we'll get to that next week. The counting of the Omer is totally a Kabbalistic custom, and it's a beautiful one, where the lower 7 sfirot, from Chesed down through Malchut, represent the 7 weeks between the second day of Passover and the beginning of Shavuos. And each day of those weeks represents one of these lower 7. And what you do every day as a Kabbalist is you take the pair, you do the counting, and you say the prayer about the mitzvah of counting the Omer, which goes back to the Torah, but without this meaning, which came in the 16th century. And you pair them. So the first day is the day of Chesed in Chesed, kindness and kindness. And then the second day is Gevorah and Chesed, and then Tiferet and Chesed. So you pairing each one, and you dwell on that, you meditate on it, and think about, how does that apply to me now? What are my weaknesses? Where do I need strength? In my Tiferet, in Chokhmah, in my balance and holiness, in my sense, I'm not Chokhmah, I mean in Chesed. They start with Chesed coming down. So where do I need more balance in my compassion? And the day before, where do I need more potency in my compassion? And the day afterwards, where do I need more principle in my compassion? So that's the counting of the Omer. And we'll talk more about that if we have time next week. Using the binding of Isaac in this way, are you saying that the Kabbalistic interpretation can make Isaac into power and evil intent? Though we read nothing of that in the text of the story. Exactly. It's not in the text. That's the garment of the story. But if you understand the symbolism, that this story is really about not a character, Abraham, the first Jew, or Isaac, his son, but it's about the introduction into the world of ongoing creation of Chesed, Abraham. And the story of Abraham is beautiful in that regard. The first thing Abraham does is Lech Lecha, go out for yourself. And he goes out and visits the tribes all over the world, in that, at least that small world there that you could travel to in the Middle East. And so it's not Abraham going and visiting, it's Chesed going and trying to introduce the concept of altruism and of kindness to a very hostile world, in dangerous place. So it is the evolution, or the evolutionary development of this whole concept of non-selfishness, which is Gevorah, the altruism and other orientedness and compassion and empathy. All of those meanings have to do with our definitions of Chesed. And right, a good response, Sarah, to the question. I love to see classmates talking to each other, answering some of the questions for me. That's beautiful. Thanks, Sarah. 3 times, does that mean through the center of the Sfirot up to Da'at, or 4 to Keter, or repeatedly, or isn't it climbing the entire chart? That's a great question, because there's lots of 3s and 4s in Jewish ritual, and the 3s, the 4s can be all 4 levels, but where there's 3s, it usually is part of an aliyah up through the Sfirot, from level to level to level. So you have 3 cups of wine on at the Tu B'Shvat Seder, and each cup of wine you're rising up 1 level, closer to the source, closer to Chokhmah that we can experience, and closer to the nothingness that we can't experience, the source of emanation itself. But you can do that. Kabbalah is very independent and free framework. So if it's more meaningful to you in your Tu B'Shvat Seder, or in anything that is a 3, to think in terms of the center column instead of the triad, going up each triad, that works too. So there's flexibility on that. Such a shame Kabbalah and spiritually became lost. It's a tragedy. Judaism has suffered because of the apparent sterility of the prayers to a lot of people. To the rituals and the prayers, the observance of the holidays, and most of these holidays, like Sukkot, have been lost to most Jews, both in meaning and certainly in meaningfulness. I have taken several Zoom classes with Daniel. Matt, you are far more engaging than he is. Thank you. Oh, that's nice to say. Thank you. I'll let Danny know that that's the case. No, I really appreciate that. Why extinguish the light into the Gevorah? Well, the light represents that additional soul, that holiness. So what we're doing is extinguishing the holiness as a manifest exemplification of an experience of our losing it. So we don't just end the Shabbat and go about starting the week, but we have this Kabbalah ritual that is that transition, and that's the most powerful part of it. That boom, now it's over. And
we
then
don't blow out the candle. We light it in the red wine.
Yeah. So when you think about that, you're extinguishing it in Gevorah. The Gevorah, you're taking Gevorah to not only open the gates to bring in the holiness and start the flow, but to end the flow of holiness. It takes Gevorah. And the quoted writers of the Zohar are the same sages as the Talmud. Yeah, they're all actual sages of the Midrash, of the Mishnah in the 2nd century, and Shimon Bar Yochai was known to be a mystic in a sense, and according to tales, and he is the reputed author of the Zohar to Orthodox, but modern scholarship has shown that it doesn't make sense because he's one of the characters of the Zohar, and usually the most mystical in his, or mysterious, I would say, more than mystical in his whatever he says. You got to really think and decode that more than other rabbis, and Elazar is his son, and he usually asks the most probing and wise questions. And then his father, Rab Shimon, often gives very mysterious answers.
Is the Zohar all Tana? Are they all from that?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
It's kind of ironic that a guy who emerged from a cave after 10 years started burning people with his eyes was the author of the Zohar.
Yeah, I don't know about that tradition. It's not Kabbalistic. That might be stories of the real character who did hide in a cave.
Right.
It might not have been for I don't know how many years, but
10 years, and then he came out and burned people with his eyes because they weren't being observant enough, and so God sent him back for 2 more years.
Yeah, right. But that's really not part of the Kabbalah.
No, and that's what's ironic about it, that he's charged with authoring it in the Orthodox tradition.
That's right. Yeah. Interesting point there. But he's not really the prominent. He's the most important of the rabbis of the group, and he says the deepest, most mysterious things, but he doesn't speak more than anybody else. Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Elazar do a lot of talking. So that's something for someone to do a dissertation on, or a scholarly paper on the characters and the consistency of what they say. Okay, so that's the question. Does anybody have anything else that I missed? One thing that I skipped over by mistake in tonight's presentation, I want to go back to, and that's the Shema. So I was going to put that in when I was talking about the names of God as applied to prayers that we say all the time, and how a Kabbalist would interpret Shema Yisrael. Well, the Shema became part of the service when the service was first created in about the 4th century before the Common Era, when public readings of Torah were introduced by Ezra and Nehemiah in that period. And Ezra wrote all of these Torahs and circulated them to the communities. And the men of the Great Assembly then had to address the question, well, like the Greeks, shouldn't we have some prayer before reading Torah? And they chose the Shema because you're about to receive revelation. Shema, listen. And the Kabbalists pick up on that. Shema means listen, receive. Receive. You're about to receive revelation. So listen, hear, receive, Israel. Adonai Eloheinu, which together Adonai and Eloheinu is Bina, which is intelligence, which is the hidden source where revelation sits before wisdom comes in and releases it within us so we can draw the meaning in Netzach of what it means. So Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Yud He Vav He, Tiferet is oneness. So listen, Israel, or Shekhinah. Israel is Shekhinah, or the Shekhinah among the people of Israel who can receive. Bina is your balance and harmony. Bina, that harmony and balance and holiness is oneness. Is really how that's translated Kabbalistically. Does that make sense? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Yud He Vav He is our Gevorah. Adonai Eloheinu, Yud He Vav He Tiferet is our Gevorah, but together they represent Bina. Listen, Israel. Bina is the source of oneness and holiness. So there's some beautiful passages of the Zohar, which we've studied on Monday night, about how in the Shema itself, we affect the same unification, Yichud, of the holiness of God, Yud He Vav He, and his Shekhinah portion. Remember, they're all part of one God, but that oneness is something we've got to effect. We've got to create that unity, and the Shema does that, including then the Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed completes the unity. So thanks, everybody, and see you next week. We'll go through the rest of the holidays, and if we have time, we might get into marriage ceremony and rituals around mourning.
Thank you, Jane. Oh, thank you for
Thank you.
lots of great things in the chat, as I said. By the way, you were talking about the various sages of the Mishnah. Joe Rosenstein in the fall is probably going to teach a class on Pirkei Avot, and he talks a lot about the people who wrote the Pirkei Avot and how they relate to each other and all this kind of stuff. So it's sort of it's not Kabbalistic. It's sort of complementary to what you're doing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I hope to see everyone a week from today on the third session or fourth session, if you want to count the introduction. Thank you again, Jay. I mean, you're pretty amazing.
Yeah. Thanks.
Wonderful class. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah. So Shauna and Sarah, I hope you'll join us for Monday nights.
Wait, what am I missing on Monday nights?
Monday is the advanced class, the Zohar class that everyone who's taken this class or is taking it has the prerequisites for joining that class, and we go through the Parshat of Shabbat and interpret it Kabbalistically, and if there's a reference to any prayers in that, then we study that prayer as a second focus. What does it mean Kabbalistically? And then we study Zohar and try to figure out what the surreptitious, the subversive message is.
So I can find the link on the Haberman website, I assume.
Well,
Yeah.
also, when I send the email out about the recording, it'll also have the link to Jay's advanced class.
Okay, thank you.
Give you my email address, so just let me know you're coming.
Okay.
At least 3 additional people said they were coming last week and they didn't make it. So
Well, it was July 4th.
very interesting. Well, class, anyways, last week.
I've only attended that one class of your regular session, but if I can endorse a little bit, flipping Korach on its head completely illustrates what you said in this class is still too intellectual. Flipping Korach on his head explains what you said.
Yeah,
So
that's
I don't know where you're going after that, but you might actually convince me that I got to read the Parsha every week.
that will help. Yeah, you know the story. Last week we read part of it out loud, but you got to read the whole parsha because the sections that the Zohar will draw in and allude to, and it's as Bamidbar as a piece of literature is phenomenal. That everything relates, just as the rabbis always interpreted Torah. Everything's there for a reason. If it's Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum B'Chanun, the why is Adonai twice? It's there for a reason. The Kabbalists will talk about that for pages, and it's fascinating.
Talmud does that same thing, but it looks like it's a different methodology. I mean, there's one whole section of, I'm not sure exactly where it's from, where there's at least a page spent on a yud. And it's a really interesting page.
On Yud, yeah. Well, the 4 letters are very important in Kabbalah. And the first Yud is Chochmah. The Yud is Chochmah. The first Hey is Bina, intelligence. The Vav is the 6 middle Sfirot. And the final Hey is the Shekhinah, Malchut. So oftentimes the Zohar will just refer to the letter, and you just have to know that it's talking about Vav, either the 6 middle or just some Tiferet, which represents all of those together sometimes.
So are you putting Shekhinah and Malchut in the same?
They are one and the same. They're not just
That's really hard for me to think about, because I think of Shekhinah being the sort of mother god, and kingship is sort of the masculine side, and I'm having trouble seeing that as the same.
Well, it's masculine in the sense of not human traits or anything sexist, but in terms of biological meaning. And the same thing with the right side of the tree of life versus the left side. The right side is considered masculine and the left side is feminine. But those traits aren't particularly masculine or feminine. It's not where that wisdom is masculine and intelligence is feminine. It's biological. It's about creation and our effecting and bringing the merger and the unity of the left and the right side, or between sphirot of the left and the right, individual sphirot, and certainly as we focus tonight in making ourselves holy, merging the Tiferet and Malchut. That is biological. It's like sexual intercourse, and through the whole animal kingdom is how life is created. And this is how revelation is created to Kabbalists. You marry Chokhmah into Bina. The womb is called Bina, is one of its names, or the sea, and the gestation aspect of that. And Chokhmah you need is a fast-flowing stream that impregnates the womb of Bina, and out of that comes the lower 7 streams, and finally revelation in Netzach, where we can understand it. Ability to grasp the meaning of it is Netzach, and the excitement is Hod, that stimulates us to want to do it again. So if that answers your question. So, but that's a great question, because don't think that it's feminist in terms of feminine in terms of woman, or as we know ourselves today, but just in a biological sense. The one that's receiving the seed or the semen is the Shekhinah, is receiving it within us, like a bride. Yeah.
Why don't we end with that sexual interpretation?
You really want a sexual education, you have to be over 40, of course. And maybe that's one of the reasons that the rabbis in 1724 made such a prohibition. But but we can break that rule here.
I don't think that any of us are under 40.
Well, talking about like the age thing, I think the point was that you needed a certain amount of life experience and maturity. And also, it wasn't just the age thing, you had to be fluent in Torah and Talmud.
Yeah.
You can't just jump into the Zohar without having any knowledge of anything to do with Judaism. That doesn't make sense. It's like you said, you have to read the Parsha. So like last week's Parsha, you have to read the Parsha, and then you have to understand what was going on in the Parsha to understand the Zohars, the rabbis who were involved in the Zohar, their interpretation. You can't, you need the alphabet before you can read, and you need the Torah and the Talmud before you can go Zohar. And even then, for somebody like me who's had some knowledge in Judaism and stuff like that, I still find this difficult and mind-boggling.
Well, part of the problem is that availability and access, because by the definition, as I've been taught it, of that limitation, perhaps Jay is qualified to be in this class, because I'm certainly not. A mere 25 years of weekly study of once a week study of Talmud isn't even close.
Well,
when Shoshana has a great point, because if you look at last week's Parsha, for instance, and the Zohar is surreptitiously talking about it's saying that Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is not perfect. Well, yeah, it is. So you have to be old enough to be able to grasp that and to understand, which the rabbis of the 17th century probably didn't, or the 18th century, didn't understand the depth of meaning that is there in that understanding, that this is really about the Sphira of Netzach, and giving us grounds to look and analyze and receive our own revelation from Torah by dealing with the what's really there and what's coming up in the weeks to come. It gets worse. I mean, the coming week he hits the rock and begins to say self-centeredly, "Look what I've done for you, ungrateful people." And then 2 weeks or so after that is Matot, where there's a genocide, revenge on the Midianites, and they're all killed. And how many? And it says in the Torah itself, and the Jews lost, the Israelites lost not a single person. So it was a genocide. So it was the worst it could have possibly been described. It's begging us to react to that. And the Zohar that does that very, very, very surreptitiously, extremely. There is no section of the Zohar on Matot. It appears later. That could be a publishing phenomena that the publishers felt that was too controversial. But if you search later and you find those passages, it's really surreptitiously questioning, what that, and what are we learning from that? Same thing that we're doing today.
I think we have to end this, Jay.
We don't have to, right? No.
Well, we can't have a class next week if you keep going the whole week.
We'll try.
Okay, everybody. See you all next week.
Thank you for the class.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Honey,
Have a good
any
week.
notes?
You too.
Good
Bye-bye.
Shabbos.
Good luck, everyone.